Larry, thanks again. I sigh because we have two federal cabinet ministers talking about using the military, specifically tanks, on Canadian citizens. Justice Minister Lametti, we have Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino exchanging messages they say are a joke. I don't really see the humor in that.
Given the seriousness of this situation that we had in Ottawa, and you got to remember, Jamie, this particular text exchange took place literally within a day or two of the arrival of the protesters, who ostensibly at that point were engaging in their constitutionally protected rights to assemble, to protest what they believed to be a health measure that they did not agree with, all again protected under Section 2 of our Charter. And to have the top lawyer, the top representative of the government, our Minister of Justice and the Attorney General, bantering about with our Public Safety Minister, Mendicino, to suggest how many tanks are going to be needed to crush this so-called insurrection is beyond acceptable. And it's very easy to reflect on the gravity of the situation and the inappropriateness of that language after the fact. But they knew at that point in time, they knew that the Emergencies Act that they were contemplating had oversight. It had oversight with respect to parliamentarians and the Senate that I'm currently involved in the Special Joint Committee, but it also had oversight in the terms of what Justice Rouleau is doing right now. So whether it's text messages, whether it's phone calls, whether it's emails, there is a higher expectation, in my view, Jamie, with these most senior ministers to be very, very careful in the words that they use. So I do not accept at face value that this was a joke. I think this was a situation that they were looking at all options and to consider that our government, a leading country in the G7, would consider bringing in the army to crush this insurrection for individuals who are simply exercising their constitutionally protected rights is appalling, to say the least.
I can't even, it's hard to even wrap my head around the fact that they would think about it to begin with, but even to their excuse, it was a joke. And these people should know better. Lametti, Justice Minister Lametti, teaches law at McGill. Marco Mendicino is a former Crown prosecutor like yourself.
Absolutely.
They should know better. They should know that joking based on what positions they hold, based on what was happening in real time, it shouldn't have even come across their minds at that point. Any other country, this would bring in a slew of resignations, but of course, this is Justin Trudeau's government. That doesn't happen. We've seen that in the past with SNC-Lavalin and many other scandals. Probably nothing will happen to these two.
I guess what's also disturbing is how cavalier our Minister of Justice and Attorney General was in simply dismissing this as a joke, showing no remorse, no contrition whatsoever, no indication at all that would give the public some sense of confidence that this was just two friends bantering about, that it was completely devoid of any merit or any intention. And I think that is the opposite as to what Canadians are now talking about at their dinner tables and considering the ramifications of what our government was prepared to do to its own people. It is absolutely appalling.
And even those that believe in the Emergencies Act was the right thing to do because it got rid of what they conceived was a problem in downtown Ottawa, look at the text messages and the conversation. Justice Minister Lametti was basically talking to Mendicino, I think in a very serious tone, saying, look, Mark Carney and others are looking to Mendicino and others within cabinet for leadership on this file. They wanted something done. To them, it was embarrassing to them. And to take that step, I just can't imagine if that had happened under a conservative government, what the media would be doing right now. But right now, it's just, it's a one-day story, really.
Not a question. And when I reflect upon the narrative that the Prime Minister and his senior ministers, including Mendicino and Lametti, were commenting on during the debate as to whether or not the act should be invoked and whether or not it should continue, we always heard this narrative that this was the method of last resort, that they contemplated everything else. They could not deal with this situation other than the invocation of the act. Well, that's completely contrary to the evidence that is now being presented before Justice Rouleau, because the first time the Emergencies Act was brought up was literally the first day the convoy arrived. So at what point do you determine that those who decide, for whatever reason, that they want to travel to the nation's capital to protest in whatever fashion they deem appropriate, at what point do you deem as a government what's acceptable and what is not? They had no intention of ever branding this particular protest as an appropriate, lawful protest. We all know the Prime Minister, right from the get-go, was demonizing and dividing the country and radicalizing these individuals, calling them all kinds of nasty names. And again, conduct, in my view, unbecoming of a Prime Minister of a G7 country.
Absolutely. And a lot of this could have been avoided. The Prime Minister, like you said, threw gasoline on the flames, on the fire, and just put it to levels that it didn't need to get to. He just needed to show compassion. People were frustrated at what was going on. People felt that their lives were spiraling out of control, and the Prime Minister, just a little compassion, probably would have quelled a lot of that.
Absolutely.
And he showed none of it. But you're right. The threshold to invoking the Emergencies Act is the last resort. If you're talking about it before it even starts, how is that not showing in clear sight for everybody to see? Even if you supported, like, the truckers leaving, it did not meet the threshold to invoke the Emergencies Act. Right there should be a measure.
It's a pretty significant piece of evidence that Justice Rouleau is going to have to weigh very heavily in his overall analysis. I think also this is an opportunity, and I know this may be a little off topic, Jamie, so I apologize to you in advance, but this might be an opportunity for us to resume that debate as to whether or not there is a justifiable reason why we should separate the Minister of Justice from the Attorney General. I know there are other countries around the world that have combined the two positions in a similar fashion to what we have in Canada, but we take a look at the SNC-Lavalin scandal. That resurrected the inappropriateness, perhaps, of wearing the dual hats. And I raise this as an issue because at the conclusion of Justice Lametti's testimony yesterday, there was a reference to him invoking solicitor-client privilege. He is the solicitor. He is the person who provided that legal advice to government, that they had the legal authority to overstep the actual wording of the Emergencies Act and put their own narrative and their own interpretation. We are founded on a rule of law. This is a law and order type of country. When you have the top lawyer wearing two hats, giving a legal opinion to the Prime Minister and his cabinet colleagues, while he is also a member of that very same cabinet, it's just a little too close for comfort. And in my view, I think gives us a reasonable opportunity to revisit that approach moving forward.
And Marco Mendicino, his testimony, the public safety minister, basically was changing the definition of the legal threshold.
Correct.
Basically, it's interpretation now, not so much what is actually written in the law.
Yes.
This changing goalposts.
Jamie, I can only imagine the vitriol and the anger that I would have received in my former career as a Crown prosecutor, as I'm presenting a case to a judge or I'm presenting a case to a jury. Don't worry what the law says. Listen to my interpretation of the law, because my interpretation is more reflective of the needs of the community, I would be laughed at. I would be scorned at. Quite frankly, I'd be probably professionally disciplined by the regulatory body, because that is exactly the equivalent to what the government of Canada has done.